artery disease is the leading killer of women and men in Western civilization. And yet, the truth be known, it is nothing more than a toothless paper tiger that need never exist. And if it does exist, it need never, ever progress. This is a foodborne illness. Well, my story begins actually in the late 1970s, early 80s, when I was chairman of the breast cancer task force at the Cleveland Clinic. And my frustration was that no matter for how many women I was doing breast surgery, I was doing nothing for the next unsuspecting victim. And this led to sort of a bit of global research. And it was quite striking to find that breast cancer rates in Kenya were something like 30 or 40 times less frequent in the United States. And if you looked at breast cancer rates in rural Japan in the 1950s, it was very infrequently identified. And yet, as soon as the Japanese women would migrate to the United States, by the second and third generation, they now had the same rate of breast cancer as their Caucasian counterpart. But even more powerful, perhaps, was the data on cancer of the prostate. In 1958, in the entire nation of Japan, how many autopsy-proven deaths were there from cancer of the prostate? 18. That's the most mind-boggling public health figure I think I've ever heard. But I made a decision then that I was concerned that my bones would long be dust before I could really get answers between nutrition and cancer. And so I chose to deal with cardiovascular disease, which is the leading killer of women and men in Western civilization. And it was quite striking that in this global review, there were a number of cultures by heritage and tradition that simply lacked any cardiovascular disease. They were plant-based. And so with that information, I came back to Cleveland, and when my wife and I decided to go on this plant-based diet for a year, and then I asked cardiology if I could have about 24 patients, which was the number that I could handle, and still carry out my surgical obligations. And the 24 patients that I received were, as my late brother-in-law used to say, the walking dead. But they were most cooperative, and it was within about, say, 15 months of starting this program that we had something striking develop. I was treating a 52-year-old gentleman who, in addition to his heart disease, had a partially blocked artery in his right thigh. And he told me about the fact that when he was crossing the Skyway to my office, he had to stop 5 times because of pain in his calf, because of this blocked artery. So I had him go to the vascular lab, and we got his pulse volume. And then I forgot all about his leg, so focused on his heart. And 8 months later, he said, "Dr. Esselstyn, you recall when I first started seeing you, I had to stop 5 times crossing the Skyway to your office. This last month, it got to be 4 times, and it was 3, 2, 1. He said, "I don't stop anymore. The pain is gone." Don, back you go to the vascular lab. I think if you look here, you can see the difference in pulse volume when I first saw him. And here we were 8 months later. It was now almost 2 times greater. So the thing that was so exciting about this was, in science, we had demonstrated what we call proof of concept. Not only that, but this occurred 1 year before the invention of the statin drugs. So this was so powerful because it showed us that indeed with nutrition, we could actually not only halt this disease, we could reverse it. And not shortly thereafter, what occurred, we saw this now in the heart. This is a 54-year-old security guard where our angiography core laboratory described this as a 30% improvement. But what really got our attention was a fellow surgeon at the clinic who, at age 44 in 1996, began to get chest pain. He did not have hypertension. He did not have diabetes. He did not have a strong family history. He was not overweight. And cardiology worked him up in October of 1996, could find nothing. 3 weeks later, he was finishing his surgical schedule, sat down to write postoperative orders, splitting headache, immediately followed by this crushing elephant on his chest, pain in his shoulder down his arm. Joe was having a heart attack. Whipped down to the cath lab. Start the catheterization, cardiac arrest. Resuscitate, and finish the catheterization. And then he's been sent up to the floors and discharged 3 days later, but very depressed. Why? Because what they identified was that his left anterior descending coronary artery in the front of the heart, the entire lower third was moth-eaten and diseased, over too long a segment to have stents, too far down the artery to have a bypass. So he was very depressed about this, so my wife Ann and I had him out to the house with his wife for supper 2 weeks after his heart attack. Joe, you've been eating this typical Western diet. You got the typical Western disease. We've got 10 years of data. How about going plant-based? Okay, yes, I'll give it a shot. They couldn't offer me anything else. He became the absolute personification of commitment to plant-based nutrition. And over the next 30 months, he then had another angiogram. Now, up in the surgical suites, our offices are 3 doors apart. And at noontime of the day that I knew earlier that morning he had his follow-up angiogram, I found myself letting myself into his office. There he was sitting behind his desk. Joe, I understand you had the old follow-up angiogram this morning. Mind sharing with me how did it go? Got up around his desk, put his arms around me. I think we're doing okay. Well, any chance I could see the follow-up angiogram? Yeah. So it was really quite striking and exciting to see what actually can happen